So as all of you guys already know, the Packers drafted Lukas Van Ness 13th overall yesterday in the first round. And Packers GM Brian Gutekunst had a press conference later last night, and he discussed some of the main reasons he likes Lukas Van Ness. He was asked about why he chose Van Ness over, Jackson Smith and Jigba, why he chose a defensive player over an offensive weapon to help Jordan Love. So I want to get into that and share lots of different quotes that I find super interesting from Brian Gutekunst about the reason for picking Lukas Van Ness and sort of how he sees him fitting into this Packers defense. If you guys are new to the channel, I put up Packers news pretty much every single day. So if you want to stay up to date with all things Packers, especially for the next few days for the draft, I'll be covering every single draft pick. I'll give some draft grades once the draft is fully over. So if you want to see all of that, feel free to subscribe. Turn on the post notifications so you don't miss any Packers content. And also, I'm doing deep dive write-ups on my Packers newsletter. I did one earlier this morning on Lukas Van Ness, sort of going deeper into his scouting report, things like that. So if you want to see all of those as well, I write those on my newsletter, which you can click the link down below in the description, and you can put in your email there and get all of my Packers writing on these prospects as well. So if we look at Lukas Van Ness, if you guys saw my video yesterday, I sort of did an initial breakdown on what Lukas Van Ness brings to this team. And as we know, he's 6'5", about 272 pounds, so a massive guy. And he's an edge rusher, also played in the interior at Iowa. But now let's get into a few of the things that Brian Gutekunst had to say. So first off, he mentioned that Rashawn Gary and Van Ness both have similar measurables, but added this. He said he's had a little bit more probably exposure inside rushing than Rashawn did coming out, but they're both big, fast, long, powerful athletes, and I think they'll complement each other well along with Preston and JJ, who is Kingsley Enagbare, 5th-round pick last year, and some of the guys we have. So one of the benefits of Lukas Van Ness, as we've already talked about, is the fact that he has that ability to play inside. He's 6'5", 272 pounds, so he can sort of handle the interior work as well. And in 2021, he spent tons of his time in the interior on the Iowa defense. And so when we look at this Packers defense, the fact that they now have a guy who, once Rashawn Gary is healthy, they could put Preston Smith on the outside, Rashawn Gary on the outside, then put Lukas Van Ness in the interior there, along with Kenny Clark and Devontae Wyatt, which makes this Packers defensive line much stronger than it was, before the first round of this draft. And then we move on. He says this. He's a very versatile player. He's a different player than Zadarius Smith was, but I think he's going to be able to do a lot of the same things as far as we used to move Z inside and rush him. He's going to be able to move inside and out. So Brian Gutekunst, I think we've seen over the past years, especially since he came in, starting back in 2018, he's always picking versatile kinds of players. When it comes to the offensive line, he likes to find guys who can play guard and kick out the tackle. That way, when you have injuries, you can flip guys around. It's not super hard. And so he's doing the same thing here with Lukas Van Ness, a guy who can play inside and outside. He was also asked why he likes bigger edge rushers, and he mentioned it's because of their ability to kick inside, because guys that have a smaller frame and aren't as heavy don't have that ability to also play inside. And so I think when we look at the Packers' 13th pick, some people were wondering why the Packers didn't decide to select Georgia edge rusher Nolan Smith. And considering what Brian Gutekunst said there about wanting to have guys who are bigger who could also play inside, if we do look at Nolan Smith, he's about 2 inches smaller than Lukas Van Ness and about 35 to 40 pounds lighter. So that could be the reason the Packers, I guess, valued Lukas Van Ness over a guy like Nolan Smith. And then he was asked, did Rashawn Gary's injury play into using the first-round selection on Van Ness? And he said that it didn't drive the decision at all. He said that the Packers like to look more long-term, but added that it happens to help in the short term. So we don't know how long Rashawn Gary will be out. There's no really for sure certain timetable on how long it'll take for that ACL to be fully ready. So there's a chance he doesn't come out and start when the season starts. He could come in a few weeks later, could be midway through the season. We just don't know. And so now the fact that Van Ness is here, we do have that ability to play him outside. Then if we move on here, when he was asked why he didn't pick offensive skill players at 13, he says this: we had really good choices. We don't pick this high very often, so we have a lot of choices, and I think it was just kind of how we had them rated. Obviously, we very much believe in rushing the passer, and edge rusher is a very premium position for us. So the Packers value edge rusher over receivers just because of their value in rushing the passer, and the Packers have been able to find receivers outside the first round for years and years. So tonight, when it comes to round 2, round 3, I expect the Packers to add some kind of pass catcher, whether that's tight end, wide receiver. There's lots of options. Only one tight end was picked last night in Dalton Kincaid. Michael Mayer's still available. Darnell Washington, Sam Laporta, Luke Musgrave. There's lots of options, lots of other receivers as well. Jalen Hyatt, Cedric Tillman, Rashee Rice, tons of other guys who are available. So the Packers, use that 13th pick on an edge rusher instead of receiver. Then he says this, so I just think there's a lot of growth there, and the physical traits are all there for him to grow, so there's no real limitation on him. But also the versatility for him, being able to win outside with speed, and then also inside with power. He also says at some point you have to have some kind of physical trait to beat a guy, and just like Rashawn, Lukas has those too. So he was sort of asked when he answered that question why the Packers sort of seem to prefer traits over production, and he mentioned that when you have those physical traits, even if you maybe haven't had the opportunity to show that production, because a guy like Van Ness only played 2 seasons at Iowa, Brian Gutekunst likes that he has no real limitation on him because of the physical traits he has. And so the Packers can, help him develop, teach him new things, teach him new pass rushing moves. And plus, Van Ness has the ability to learn from a guy like Rashawn Gary, Preston Smith, Kenny Clark. So he the sky is really the limit for him. And a couple quotes to finish it off. He says this: the character of the guy really checked out. He's a culture guy for us. He's a fit here. He's a worker. It's really important to him. I think that always gives you comfort because you know that whatever talent he has in his body, if he'll work, he'll get there. And when we look at the team like the Packers when it comes to the draft, they have to make sure that these guys can be a fit in a culture like Green Bay, where you're in a small town, you don't have the big city feel. Can you handle that kind of thing? And so the Packers and Brian Gutekunst over the past few drafts, after I've watched all these, press conferences after the draft, he always mentions the character of the guys and how they, could fit in here in the culture here in Green Bay. And it seems that Van Ness is going to fit well here, which is great to hear. And then he says this: I do think he's going to play right away, and he'll help us right away. I would expect him to be out there helping us this year. So it sounds like even though Van Ness is going to be a rookie coming in here, because of the opportunity there on the defensive line, as I mentioned yesterday, Jaron Reed as well as Dean Lowry both left this offseason. So there's lots of opportunity on the interior and outside with there not being a ton of depth at edge rusher, plus you add Rashawn Gary's injury. It sounds like there's a really good chance that Van Ness comes in here and starts year one. And he was even asked about that regarding Rashawn Gary, and he said that Rashawn Gary could have maybe had more opportunity his first year if they hadn't signed Preston Smith and Zadarius Smith. So because of the opportunity here this year, when it comes to edge rusher interior, it sounds like Van Ness right away is going to get work. So I'm curious to see how he sort of helps this Packers defense. And one thing I was thinking about earlier today was when you look at this Packers defense coming into 2023, yes, last year we didn't really live quite up to the expectations I think many of us had going into the season. But when you look at the defense from last year, there's tons of guys who were rookies last year coming into year 2. I guess 2 specifically, Quay Walker and Devontae Wyatt on the interior of the defensive line. So when we look at them potentially taking big jumps forward in their second year, you add that with Van Ness coming in here who could make a big impact right away. I think those are just sort of natural things that could lead to this Packers defense maybe being slightly better than last year just because of that development from some of these key players at key positions like middle linebacker, like defensive tackle. But overall, that's pretty much what Brian Gutekunst had to say. If you would like to stay up to date with all Packers news, Packers draft news, feel free to subscribe. If you want to see my the write-ups on these players in more detail, feel free to subscribe to my newsletter, link down below in the description. You can enter your email, receive all of that. But thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you guys, and I'll see you guys next time.